Okay, we got a full house today. Let's bring in Mark Mix. Mark, as you know, as everyone knows, Mark is the president and the director of the National Right to Work Foundation. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
John, good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity. The Washington Post was going to take a dive. They ran an op-ed signed by me, which was, I don't know if I'm on the wrong side or just they decided to change their stripes, but it was amazing to have an opportunity to have a piece in the Washington Post about union bargaining in Virginia.
Now, tell us about union bargaining in Virginia because it's passed through the committees. It's going to reconciliation, I believe, and crossover. This is a complete disaster because it gives every government employee in the Commonwealth of Virginia the ability to organize, have collective bargaining, and then if two sides don't agree, you have a third party that's just making the decision, regardless of how it impacts the budget or taxes or anything else, Mark.
Yeah, indeed, John. There was a House bill and a Senate bill. The House bill is passed to the Senate. The Senate bill is passed to the House. It met the crossover deadline. The bills have a little bit of differences between them. One bill includes healthcare employees. These are employees, quote unquote, that they're going to grab as quote unquote state employees. We won a Supreme Court case back in 2014 that said these types of healthcare providers are not employees under state control. And then the other bill has higher education employees in and one doesn't. So there probably will end up being a conference committee on this. But both bills have passed their chambers and now they're in the other chamber. Right now, there's been nothing scheduled on either bill in either chamber. But you're right, John. This bill would mandate union bargaining for all government employees in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Scott Somerville, the Senate Majority Leader, said he's interested in handing over 500,000 employees to the Service Employees International Union. This is outrageous. It's something that most states are reforming and running away from, as opposed to running headlong into giving union officials dramatic power over the cost and the operations of the Commonwealth's government at every level.
So this is likely to come out of conference as a bill, likely, right? Because the differences, when I read the recap of the differences, they weren't insurmountable.
Right.
Like there's a couple other bills where it's going to be very difficult to get there, but they're not insurmountable. So it's likely to come out of the conference committee, and then end up on Spanberger's desk. And she's running around, doing speeches after Trump about affordability. This thing, the Heritage Foundation says if this thing goes through, it's going to cost Virginia taxpayers $3,000 a year in additional fees and taxes. $3,000. How does that fit her affordability mantra, Mark Mix?
Well, it doesn't, John. And, it looked basically under Ralph Norman in 2021, they passed a bill that made this optional for localities. There's 133 municipal organizations at the counties and cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They will all be covered by this. Only 14 to this point have decided to do it. And in Richmond, for example, the city of Richmond decided to do it. Their cost structure went up from 5% to 38% cost increase for labor. I mean, how can you do something like that and not expect that taxes are going to increase? It's really simple math. When you look at the states like California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, those states that are on the financial precipice of disaster have basically gone headlong into this and are trying to get back out of it. Wisconsin, for example, John, you may remember Scott Walker in 2012. He decided that the only way to solve the budget problem in Wisconsin was to reform the bargaining process. Wisconsin was the first state to do it in 1959, and they were the state that ran as far away from it as they possibly could in 2012. And they've estimated taxpayers there have saved over $30 billion since then. So the cost structures, and this has nothing to do with affordability, it has everything to do with political power.
Mark, the thing, and I'm gonna get Rob here involved because this is real. So localities have to balance their budget. Counties have to balance their budget. Virginia, under Constitution, has to balance their budget. So if you're in a county or a locality and your costs go up because of this collective bargaining, and your costs go up, like you said, 25, 30%, and that takes your budget out of balance, they've only got two choices. They either have to cut something or they have to raise your property tax. There's no other way out of this, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. And that's been the experience of the states that have been in this situation. And you mentioned the binding arbitration piece of the bill. That is literally, if they get to impasse, some third party will come in and say, you've got to have this or do this, and basically take control of government away from elected officials and hand it not only to a private organization, which is a labor union, but then even worse, give it to a third party that comes in and says, okay, cut the baby in half, or give the baby to that mother instead of this mother. Those are the things that happen under this regime. And it's wrong. I mean, even Franklin Roosevelt knew and understood that the concept of bargaining, union bargaining, cannot exist in the public sector. In the private sector, there's competition. There's things, if you grab too much or squeeze the goose's neck too tight, you've destroyed a business and destroyed jobs. Here in government, this is a monopoly, and what we're doing is applying a monopoly of union power on a monopoly of government activity.
And Rob, the other thing with it is when you get to the when you get to the arbitration part. See, without arbitration, you simply have to get to the table and work it out. But the way they've got this written in Virginia is third-party arbitrators are just going to decide, and there's no recourse. So if they simply decide, yes, you're going to do this, and it's going to cost this locality 30% more, that locality has no option. I mean, they simply have to raise property taxes, raise fees, or cut something.
Employers never want to give more money to workers or more rights or more vacation or more healthcare. Collective bargaining is a way of securing better paying jobs, better rights for workers. I think that's the other side of this equation. And the second point I would make is, as a foreigner, it's always kind of interesting to me the power of the unions in America, which runs this ultra capitalist society. I mean, you all think of us in Britain and Europe of having extraordinary working patterns and long vacation times, and the power of our form of socialized welfare,
right,
and so on. But I come to America and I find, one of the most powerful unions. Well, they're the sporting unions.
Major League Baseball.
It's one of those weird dichotomies that I never quite understand.
But see, in this,
America.
Look, Mark and I are two pro-union guys. Both of our fathers were in unions their whole life. My father when he died, he didn't get cremated.
Hold on. Yeah, until you have to pay a bit more.
No, I mean, I'm a whole union guy. When he got buried, he wanted his union card in his breast pocket. This is not about the right to unionize.
Right.
This is about public employees that are public, part of the public sector, that there is no recourse. And if they collective bargain and they get stuff, there's no way to pay it except to sock it to the taxpayer, because there's no way out. Right? If I'm collective bargaining, when I worked from the Philadelphia Choir, okay, you had the Guild. They were the writers, and they were a part of the Union Guild, right? And they had a bunch of rights and a bunch of things. Then they unionized sales. So then sales were there, right? But I mean, when sales went down because you couldn't get them to do anything or sell anything, right? Then you had to go back to them and say, we have to have a way out of this because we need to pay people commission. Our salespeople are not working. And so they had to get back to the table or the paper was going to close. So then they would have a job. You can't do that in the public sector. You're not going to shut down Fairfax County. You're not going to shut down the city of Richmond. So you simply pass it on to the taxpayer. Mark, that's the difference here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the private sector, that model works that Rob's talking about. In fact, I think you have the chapel system in your country. That's kind of the union movement there. But this is the public sector, and that's the difference. I mean, even the AFL-CIO president, George Meany, said it's unthinkable that we would bargain with government. It's not the same. Now, forming unions, public sector unions, is one thing, and that's protected. The ability to join together voluntarily to amplify your voice in the public, in a public scheme and lobby for things is perfectly fine. And we know in Fairfax County, the firefighters is a very strong union. The teachers are very strong. But the question is, do you compel governments to bargain with them over how government operates? That's the situation. In the private sector, Roosevelt recognized it. The AFL-CIO Executive Council recognized it. George Meany recognized it, that it's not appropriate to have the same bargaining structure in the public sector as the private sector. And that's really what the debate's about, Rob. It's about control of government and how a private institution can get between elected officials and those that vote for them or pay taxes.
Yeah, because there's no, like, when you're in private business, there's no independent arbiter that decides. I mean, I specifically remember at the Philadelphia Inquirer that I think at the time was owned by Knight Ridder, and I was there because McClatchy was buying it, but it was owned by Knight Ridder. I specifically remember being at that table, and I was part of the general management team, and we went to the union, and we're like, we can't get these guys to do anything. They're so protected. They get paid if they sell or not, and the commission's this big, so they don't do anything. So we said, look, in order to save the paper, we're to save those jobs, we want a separate organization of salespeople that are 100% commission, that are not part of the union. If they want to join, they can pay your dues. You can talk to them, but we got to have this. But there was no independent arbiter there to say, no, you can't do that. Right? It was the union leaders who recognized if sales didn't go up, the Philadelphia Inquirer was going to collapse and they'd all be out of a job. But if an independent arbiter went there and said, no, sorry, we're not going to do that, then we would have to pay it. The thing would have went out of business and McClatchy would have bought it and closed it. This is just reality, Mark.
Yeah, well, and that's the difference. In the private sector, that newspaper would go away, but another newspaper would fill the void. And to your point, John, there is nobody that fills the void when the firefighters in the city of Richmond or the garbage collectors or the teachers go out on strike. And, one of the provisions they always put in these bills that strikes are illegal, that we can't have strikes. Well, interestingly enough, there's 39 states that have provisions that say strikes are illegal. Massachusetts is one of them. And since 2019, there have been 12 illegal strikes, but the first thing they asked for is amnesty, saying we're not coming back until to dismiss the penalties that you're going to impose on us because the law said we couldn't strike. So it's a different deal. And in the private sector, Rob, you can make that argument very, very clearly and very cogently, and it exists. The federal law protects workers' rights to organize and bargain at the federal level in the private sector. The public sector is a different animal altogether, and it really is. I mean, history is writing a story about how it doesn't work in the public sector, and that because basically, look at Illinois, look at the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, it's just an amazing story about how they exercise that power by withholding their labor for a monopoly system that is the only system, quote, that provides that service. And that's where the difference comes down. And that's what's at stake here in Virginia right now with these two bills.
So listen, Spanberger's running on affordability, but she's also, Rob, a likely candidate for president for the Democrats. So she's got to basically pigeon herself to the far left radical element that's controlling her party, i.e., Jasmine Crockett in Texas. Is she going to veto this bill?
I don't know, John. She hasn't definitively said one way or the other. She was out in front of the governor's office, I guess, last week with a bunch of SEIU employees, higher education employees that are not in one of the bills. The state university system, their employees will not be in it. And she was talking to them, but she didn't say definitively where she was. And I think what ultimately is going to happen is that they will strip away all of the extra stuff and they will get to this mandatory bargaining proposition, because that's where they want to be. They want to have mandatory bargaining, and then they'll build off of that, and it will get to be like California. It will get to be like New York. So she doesn't have to support the whole thing, but she can say, well, because of dignity and respect and all those things that are part and parcel of forcing people to join an organization they may not want to join, she'll say that they're supportive of that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the conference committee. It'll be interesting to see what the Senate does to the House bill and the House does to the Senate bill. And there's still a story to be written, and we've got a couple more weeks here left in the legislative session. So,
see how much fun you would have if you were covering Richmond, Rob?
Yeah, well, I could be spending more time there, shouldn't I? By the sounds of things,
it's a lot of fun. But we'll see what happens. But I'm going to bring Michael Graham in. Stay with us, Mark, so we can have a three set here. But let's get to Spanberger. I mean, first of all, you know what her response reminded me of? I went to bed. Right, I went to bed because the thing went on to 11 o'clock, and then
I was watching Robert De Niro. I was at the Robert De Niro event, so yeah.
Ann and I were at the Guess where we were, Mark? We went to this is my biggest supporters. We went to the Log Cabin Republican event in D.C. They had about 120 people there. Place was packed. It was like being at a football game. Like all they were doing was cheer and everything Trump said. They were, yeah, let's go. Of course, we're bars 3 deep. Finally, Ann and I were like, I gotta go to bed. I gotta go to bed. I gotta get up at 4 tomorrow. So we missed the spam. But it reminded me of, remember well, you're too young and Mark is too. You guys are too young. Michael Graham, bring in Graham. He's old enough. He'll remember this. It was 1972, and George McGovern didn't really get the nomination. It was like the 3rd ballot until 1 o'clock in the morning. He made his acceptance speech at 1:20 Eastern time, and nobody heard it. And he won 1 state.